The sun was setting over the dusty town of Red Rock, Arizona, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The air smelled of dry earth and faint traces of gasoline from the nearby gas station. Jake Monroe sat at his usual spot in the Rusty Spur, a dimly lit bar tucked away on the edge of town. It wasn't much to look at, just a few wooden tables, a jukebox that hadn't worked in years, and a neon sign flickering weakly above the door. But it was home to Jake and the handful of locals who gathered there every evening. Jake was a man of simple habits. He liked his coffee black, his whiskey neat, and his poker games quiet. Tonight he was seated at a small round table with 3 other players: Harold, a grizzled rancher; Linda, a waitress with sharp eyes and quicker hands; and Carl, a truck driver who always smelled faintly of diesel. They were deep into a game of Texas Hold'em, the cards sliding across the scarred surface of the table as chips clinked softly with each bet. Outside, the world seemed calm. Crickets chirped in the distance and the occasional car rumbled down the main road. But inside the Rusty Spur, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake studied his cards carefully, his face unreadable. He had learned long ago how to keep his emotions in check, a skill that had served him well in both life and poker. Across the table, Harold shifted nervously in his seat, while Linda tapped her fingers against the edge of her glass. Carl leaned back in his chair, chewing on a toothpick like he didn't have a care in the world. Just as Jake was about to make his move, the lights in the bar flickered. Everyone froze, glancing up at the ceiling. For a moment there was silence, no hum of electricity, no distant hum of conversation. Then, without warning, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Glasses rattled on the shelves behind the bar, and the old jukebox slid an inch forward with a metallic groan. "What the hell was that?" Linda asked, her voice tight with unease. No one answered. Instead, they all turned toward the window. Outside, the sky had darkened unnaturally fast, the stars blotted out by something enormous hovering above the town. At first, it looked like a cloud, but then it began to shimmer, its surface reflecting colors that didn't belong in nature. Blues, greens, and silvers danced across its massive form, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. People started pouring out of their homes and businesses drawn by the strange sight. Some pointed and whispered while others shielded their eyes, squinting against the brightness. Jake stood up slowly, leaving his cards face down on the table. Something about the object in the sky felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but not friendly either. He pushed open the door of the bar and stepped outside, joining the growing crowd in the street. The ship, it was clearly a ship now, hung motionless above the center of town, casting an eerie glow over everything below. It was shaped like a flattened teardrop, smooth and seamless, with no visible windows or markings. As Jake stared up at it, a section of the hull slid open silently, revealing a bright light within. Figures emerged, stepping gracefully onto what appeared to be a beam of energy that extended down to the ground. They weren't human. That much was obvious even from a distance. The creatures were tall and slender, their bodies covered in translucent skin that glowed faintly blue. Their faces were elongated with large almond-shaped eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. They moved with a fluidity that was almost hypnotic, their steps perfectly synchronized. A ripple of fear ran through the crowd. Some people backed away, muttering prayers under their breath. Others stood frozen, unable to tear their gaze away. Jake felt his pulse quicken, but he forced himself to stay calm. Whatever these beings were, they hadn't done anything threatening yet. Not that he could see, anyway. One of the aliens stepped forward, separating itself from the group, its head tilted slightly as if studying the humans before it. Then, without speaking, it raised a hand. A low hum filled the air, resonating in Jake's chest, and then suddenly a voice spoke, not aloud but directly in his mind. "We are the Valons," it said. The words were calm and measured, carrying no hint of aggression. "We have come to learn about your species." Jake blinked, startled. Around him, others gasped or stumbled backward, clearly hearing the same thing. The alien continued, its telepathic voice steady and clear. Your kind is known for its strategic thinking, its ability to adapt and overcome challenges. We wish to test this reputation. If you accept our challenge, we will engage in a contest of wits, a game of skill and strategy." The crowd murmured uncertainly. A game? Was this some kind of joke? Or worse, a trick? No one dared to speak up, though. The aliens radiated an aura of power that made resistance seem futile. Jake glanced around, noting the fear etched on the faces of his neighbors. Someone needed to step forward to show that humanity wasn't going to cower in the face of the unknown. Taking a deep breath, he raised his hand slightly. "If it's a game you want," he said, his voice steady despite the knot of nerves in his stomach, "then let's play." The alien leader, the one who had introduced itself as Kalen, turned its glowing gaze toward Jake. There was a pause, as if it were assessing him. Then, ever so slightly, it inclined its head. "Very well," it said. "You shall represent your species." As the rest of the townspeople watched in stunned silence, Jake followed the Valons toward their ship. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. Whatever was about to happen, he knew one thing for certain: humanity's fate might very well depend on how well he could bluff his way through a game of cards. Jake stepped into the shadow of the massive alien ship, his boots crunching softly on the dry desert ground. The air around him felt different here. Thicker, almost electric, as if the very atmosphere had been altered by the presence of the Valons. He glanced back at the crowd of townspeople standing a safe distance away, their faces pale and uncertain in the strange glow of the hovering craft. Some were whispering prayers, while others simply stared, frozen in place. Jake couldn't blame them. If he hadn't already decided to step forward, he might have been standing among them, too scared to move. The Valons didn't speak as they led Jake inside their ship. Instead, they gestured silently, their movements fluid and deliberate. A section of the hull slid open smoothly, revealing a narrow beam of light that extended down to the ground like a glowing bridge. Jake hesitated for only a moment before stepping onto it. The surface felt solid beneath his feet, though it shimmered faintly, as if made of liquid metal. As he walked, the beam carried him upward, lifting him gently into the ship's interior. Inside, the environment was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls glowed with a soft, pulsating light, shifting colors and patterns that seemed almost alive. There were no corners, no sharp edges. Everything flowed seamlessly into everything else, as if the entire ship were carved from a single piece of material. In the center of the room, a circular table hovered a few inches above the floor, its surface shimmering like water, but solid enough to hold objects. Around it, holographic chairs flickered into existence, waiting for occupants. Kalen, the leader of the Valons, turned to face Jake. "You will not play alone," it said, its voice resonating directly in Jake's mind. "Two others from your group will join you. Together you will represent humanity." Before Jake could respond, Kalen gestured toward the crowd outside. Two figures emerged hesitantly, a young woman named Emily Dawson, who worked as a mechanic at the local garage, and an older man named Walter Green, a retired teacher with a reputation for being quiet but sharp-witted. Emily looked nervous, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her jacket, while Walter adjusted his glasses and peered around the room with obvious curiosity. "You three will compete against us in a series of games," Kalen continued. "Each round will test your skill, adaptability, and creativity. If you win, we will leave your planet in peace and share knowledge that could benefit your species. If you lose—" It paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "We will take what we need." Jake exchanged a glance with Emily and Walter. Neither of them looked particularly confident, but they nodded, steeling themselves for whatever was about to come. Kalen gestured for them to take their seats at the floating table. 3 Valons joined them, their glowing forms casting faint shadows on the smooth floor. The first game began almost immediately. A deck of cards appeared on the table, materializing out of thin air. They weren't ordinary cards. Their surfaces shimmered with holographic designs, and they floated slightly above the table as if defying gravity. Kalen explained the rules. Texas Hold'em, just like Jake had played countless times before. But there was a twist. The Valons could sense emotions and read body language perfectly. Bluffing would be nearly impossible. Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't going to be easy. Still, he forced himself to focus. He picked up his cards, studying them carefully. Beside him, Emily fidgeted nervously while Walter leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. The first hand started with a Valon player making a modest bet. Jake matched it, trying to keep his expression neutral. He knew the aliens were watching him closely, analyzing every twitch of his fingers, every shift in his posture. When it was Emily's turn, she hesitated, her eyes darting between her cards and the Valons across the table. Finally, she folded, setting her cards down with a shaky sigh. Walter, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He studied the odds, calculating probabilities in his head, and raised the bet confidently. The Valons responded with calm precision, their moves calculated and efficient. By the time the flop was revealed, the tension in the room was palpable. Jake found himself in a difficult position. His hand wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible either. He decided to take a risk, raising the bet in an attempt to throw off the Valons. To his surprise, one of them folded immediately, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly as if puzzled by his move. The other two stayed in, matching his bet without hesitation. As the game progressed, Jake realized something important. The Valons were good, but they weren't infallible. They relied heavily on their ability to read emotions, which meant they struggled when faced with unpredictable behavior. Emily caught on quickly, starting to exaggerate her reactions, faking nervousness when she had a strong hand, or pretending to be confident when she was bluffing. Walter used his mathematical skills to calculate odds faster than anyone thought possible, making decisions that baffled even the Valons. By the end of the first round, the humans had managed to tie the score. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a loss either. Kalen tilted its head slightly, studying the trio with renewed interest. Impressive, it said, its telepathic voice tinged with something that might have been admiration. You are more adaptable than we anticipated. Jake allowed himself a small smile, though he didn't let his guard down. He knew this was only the beginning. The Valons wouldn't make the same mistakes twice, and the next round was sure to be even harder. Still, as he glanced at Emily and Walter, he felt a flicker of hope. They might not have superhuman abilities or advanced technology, but they had something the Valons didn't: human ingenuity, resilience, and the willingness to fight for what mattered. As the Valons prepared for the second round, Jake leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Whatever came next, he was ready. For the first time since the aliens arrived, he felt a spark of confidence. Humanity might be outmatched, but it wasn't outplayed. Not yet, anyway. The second round began with a new set of rules, ones that made Jake's stomach churn. Kalen explained calmly, its glowing form hovering slightly above the table, that this time the cards would change values mid-game. What started as a king could become a 2, or a jack might transform into an ace without warning. The Valons seemed unfazed by the twist, their expressions unreadable as always. But for Jake, Emily, and Walter, it was a nightmare. How were they supposed to strategize when the game itself kept shifting? Jake clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay focused. He glanced at Emily, who looked pale but determined, and Walter, whose glasses reflected the eerie light of the floating table. They had come this far, and giving up wasn't an option. We'll figure it out, he muttered under his breath, more to reassure himself than anything else. The first hand started, and almost immediately the challenges became clear. A card in Jake's hand, a queen, flashed briefly before morphing into a 5. He blinked, trying to process what had just happened. Across the table, one of the Valons raised its bet confidently, as if nothing unusual was occurring. Beside him, Emily let out a frustrated sigh, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the table. Walter leaned forward, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. This isn't random, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. There has to be a pattern, something they're using to predict the changes. Jake nodded, grateful for Walter's sharp mind. If anyone could find logic in this madness, it was him. While Walter studied the cards intently, Emily tried to focus on reading the Veilon's behavior. She had already proven herself skilled at faking tells, and now she watched their movements closely, searching for any sign of hesitation or uncertainty. But the aliens remained eerily calm, their glowing forms radiating an unsettling confidence. As the round progressed, Jake realized the key to surviving this game wasn't just about playing the cards. It was about staying one step ahead of the Veilons. They thrived on predictability, on understanding their opponent's emotions and reactions. So Jake decided to give them something unexpected. When it was his turn to act, he made a bold move, raising the bet dramatically, even though his hand was mediocre at best. The Veilon across from him hesitated for the briefest moment, its glowing eyes flickering slightly before it matched the bet. Emily noticed the hesitation too, and seized the opportunity. She threw all her energy into creating distractions, exaggerating her reactions to throw the Veilons off balance. When she had a weak hand, she leaned back casually, pretending to be bored. When her cards were strong, she fidgeted and glanced around the room as if nervous. It was a risky strategy, but it worked, at least for a little while. Meanwhile, Walter continued to search for patterns in the changing cards. He scribbled notes on a small pad he'd pulled from his pocket, jotting down sequences and probabilities. His brow furrowed in concentration, but after several minutes a spark of realization lit up his face. "I think I see it," he whispered urgently. "The changes aren't random. They follow a cycle based on the suits. Hearts shift every 3 turns, diamonds every 4, clubs every 5, and spades every 6. Jake and Emily exchanged a glance, both of them silently agreeing to trust Walter's calculations. With this new information, they adjusted their strategies, timing their bets and bluffs according to the cycles Walter had uncovered. For a brief moment, it felt like they had the upper hand. The Veilons seemed caught off guard, their usual precision faltering as the humans adapted to the shifting rules. But the aliens weren't done yet. Just as Jake thought they might pull ahead, Kalen introduced another twist: invisible hands. Suddenly, the players weren't just competing against each other. They were also dealing with phantom opponents whose actions influenced the game without being seen. Bets appeared out of nowhere, cards were folded or raised by unseen forces, and the tension in the room skyrocketed. Emily groaned softly, rubbing her temples. "How are we supposed to compete with this?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "We keep going," Jake replied firmly. "One step at a time." Walter nodded in agreement. "It's still a game," he said. "And games have rules, even if they're hidden. We just need to stay calm and think." Jake took a deep breath, reminding himself why he was here. Not just for himself, but for everyone back in Red Rock, and maybe for all of humanity. He couldn't afford to lose focus now. As the next hand began, he relied on instinct as much as strategy, trusting his gut when the numbers didn't add up and leaning on Emily and Walter to cover his blind spots. Despite their efforts, the third round proved too much. The invisible hands grew more aggressive, pushing the humans into increasingly difficult positions. Emily made a critical mistake, misreading a bluff from one of the Veilons and losing a large portion of their collective chips. Walter tried to compensate, but even his calculations couldn't account for the unpredictable nature of the game. By the end of the round, the score tipped decisively in favor of the Veilons. Kalen tilted its head slightly, studying the humans with an unreadable expression. "You performed admirably," it said, its telepathic voice calm and measured. "But there is still much to learn." Jake clenched his fists beneath the table, frustration bubbling inside him. They had come so close, only to fall short. Still, he refused to show weakness. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of their loss. "Bring it on." As the Veilons prepared for the final round, Jake, Emily, and Walter retreated to a corner of the ship to regroup. Outside, the townspeople of Red Rock waited anxiously, unaware of how close the outcome hung in the balance. Back home, arguments had broken out among the crowd. Some believed the poker match was humanity's last hope, while others accused Jake and the others of risking everything for nothing. Inside the ship, Jake stared at the glowing table, his mind racing. They had lost this round, but they hadn't been defeated. Not yet. There was still one more chance to turn things around, one final hand to play. And Jake knew exactly what was at stake. Not just Earth's resources, but its pride, its spirit, and its future. "We can do this," he said, finally looking at Emily and Walter. "We've got no choice." Emily nodded, determination replacing the doubt in her eyes. Walter adjusted his glasses, his expression resolute. Together they returned to the table, ready to face whatever came next. The final round loomed ahead, its stakes higher than ever. But Jake felt a quiet resolve settling over him. Whatever happened, they would fight until the very end. The final round began with an announcement from Kalen that sent a chill through the room. "This will be the deciding hand," it said, its glowing form casting faint shadows on the smooth floor. "Each bet represents something of value: cities, forests, oceans. If you lose, those things will be forfeited forever." Jake felt his heart sink. The stakes had just become unimaginably high. Every move they made would have real-world consequences, not just for Red Rock, but for the entire planet. He glanced at Emily and Walter, both of whom looked as stunned as he felt. For a moment, the weight of what they were facing threatened to crush him. But then he remembered why he was here: to protect humanity, no matter the cost. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to focus. Kalen gestured, and a new deck of cards materialized on the table. These cards shimmered more brightly than before, their holographic design swirling like living things. As the Valons dealt the first hand, Jake noticed something different about the atmosphere in the room. It wasn't just tension. It was anticipation, as if even the aliens themselves were unsure how this would end. Jake picked up his cards, studying them carefully. His hand wasn't great, a pair of sevens, but it wasn't terrible either. Across the table, one of the Valons raised the initial bet, its movements calm and deliberate. Jake matched it, trying to keep his expression neutral. Beside him, Emily hesitated before folding, her face pale but determined. Walter stayed in, raising the bet slightly, his eyes narrowed behind his glasses. As the flop was revealed, Jake realized this round was going to be unlike anything they'd faced before. The cards didn't just change values, they seemed to react to the player's emotions. When Emily glanced nervously at her chips, one of the community cards shifted subtly, as if responding to her anxiety. Walter noticed it too and leaned closer to Jake. "They're using our feelings against us," he whispered urgently. "We need to stay calm, no matter what." Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of Walter's words. The Valons thrived on reading emotions, turning uncertainty into weakness. If they could sense fear or doubt, they would exploit it mercilessly. Jake took a slow, steady breath, focusing on keeping his mind clear. He glanced at Emily, who was biting her lip but managing to hold herself together. She caught his eye and gave a small nod, signaling she was ready to push forward. When it was Jake's turn to act, he made a bold decision. Instead of playing cautiously, he went all in, pushing nearly all his chips into the center of the table. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Across the table, the Valons exchanged glances, their glowing forms flickering faintly. Kalen tilted its head, studying Jake with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You are risking much," Kalen said, its telepathic voice resonating in Jake's mind. "Are you certain of your choice?" Jake met the alien's gaze without flinching. "I'm certain," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "If you want to win, you'll have to beat me." For a moment, there was silence. Then, one of the Valons folded, its glowing hands retreating from the table. Another followed suit, leaving only Kalen in the game. The alien leader hesitated, its translucent skin shimmering faintly as it considered its options. Finally, it pushed its own chips into the center, matching Jake's bet. The turn card appeared, shifting once before settling into place. It was a king, strengthening Jake's hand, if his original sevens hadn't changed value. He glanced at the cards on the table, trying to calculate the odds. Beside him, Walter leaned in, whispering calculations under his breath. Emily sat rigidly, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. When the river card was revealed, Jake felt his pulse quicken. It was another 7, completing a full house. He fought to keep his expression blank, knowing the Valons would be watching for any sign of triumph. Across the table, Kalen studied the board, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly. For the first time, Jake thought he saw a flicker of doubt cross the alien's face. "It is your move," Kalen said finally, its voice calm but tinged with something unfamiliar. "Uncertainty." Jake took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage he had left. "I call," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. The room seemed to freeze as Kalen revealed its hand. It was strong, a flush, but not strong enough to beat Jake's full house. For a moment there was complete silence. Then, slowly, Kalen inclined its head, acknowledging defeat. "You have won," it said, its telepathic voice carrying a note of respect. "Your species has proven itself worthy." Relief washed over Jake like a tidal wave, leaving him dizzy and breathless. Beside him, Emily let out a shaky laugh, tears streaming down her face. Walter adjusted his glasses, his expression a mix of disbelief and pride. They had done it. They had beaten the Valons. Kalen gestured, and the floating table dissolved into thin air. "We will honor our agreement," it said. "Earth's resources will remain untouched, and we will share knowledge of clean energy, technology as a gesture of goodwill." With that, the Valons turned and moved toward the exit, their glowing forms disappearing into the depths of their ship. As the craft ascended into the sky, the townspeople of Red Rock erupted into cheers. Some hugged each other, others cried openly, and a few simply stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what had just happened. Jake stepped outside, squinting against the brightness of the morning sun. The desert air smelled fresh, almost alive, as if the world itself was celebrating. Back at the Rusty Spur, the bar was packed with people eager to hear the story. Jake recounted the events in simple terms, emphasizing the teamwork that had made victory possible. Emily described how she had faked tells to confuse the Valons, while Walter explained how he had uncovered patterns in the changing cards. Together they painted a picture of resilience and ingenuity, qualities that had saved humanity from disaster. In the days that followed, life in Red Rock began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after an alien encounter. Emily decided to open her own garage, inspired by the confidence she had found during the game. Walter wrote a detailed account of the experience, hoping to inspire future generations. And Jake? He went back to playing poker at the Rusty Spur, dealing hands with the same quiet determination that had carried him through the most important game of his life. But whenever someone asked him about the night the aliens came, he simply smiled and dealt another hand. In the sky above, the Valon ship disappeared into the stars, leaving behind a message broadcast across the planet. "You may be small, but your spirit is vast. We will remember you, humans." And so, the legend of Jake Monroe and his showdown with the Valons lived on, reminding everyone that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons but with wits and a well-timed bluff. The days that followed the Valons' departure felt surreal in Red Rock, Arizona. The town buzzed with a mix of relief and disbelief, as if everyone was waiting for some hidden twist to reveal itself. But no twist came. The aliens were gone, their massive ship nothing more than a fading memory in the sky. Life slowly began to return to its usual rhythm, though it was impossible to ignore the changes that had taken root. Jake Monroe found himself back at the Rusty Spur, seated at his favorite table with a fresh cup of coffee and a deck of cards. The bar was quieter now, the initial excitement having settled into something more subdued. People still talked about the poker game, of course. How could they not? It wasn't every day that three ordinary humans faced down an alien species and walked away victorious. But Jake didn't dwell on it. For him, the game was over, and there was no sense in living in the past. Still, he couldn't help but notice the way people looked at him differently now. Harold, the grizzled rancher, who used to tease Jake about his quiet demeanor, clapped him on the back whenever they crossed paths. Linda, the sharp-eyed waitress, brought him free drinks without asking. Even Carl, the truck driver who rarely said more than 2 words at a time, nodded respectfully when Jake passed by. It was strange being treated like some kind of hero, but Jake didn't let it go to his head. He was just a man who happened to play cards well. Emily Dawson, on the other hand, embraced her newfound fame with open arms. She had always dreamed of opening her own garage, but before the Valon encounter, it had seemed like little more than a distant hope. Now, inspired by the confidence she had discovered during the game, she threw herself into making her dream a reality. With the help of donations from grateful townspeople and a small grant from the government which wanted to celebrate humanity's victory, Emily transformed an old warehouse on the edge of town into Dawson's auto shop. Her business quickly became a local landmark, known not only for its quality work but also for the stories Emily loved to tell about bluffing aliens out of billions of dollars worth of Earth's resources. Walter Green took a different approach. Retired and uninterested in the spotlight, he spent most of his time writing. Using notes he had jotted down during the game, he crafted a detailed account of the experience, calling it simply, "The Poker Match That Saved Humanity." At first, Walter thought he would publish it locally, maybe sell a few copies at the town's general store. But when word got out about the book, publishers from across the country came knocking. Within months, Walter's story was being read by millions, sparking debates about human ingenuity, teamwork, and the importance of staying calm under pressure. Walter didn't care much for the fame. He just liked knowing that his words might inspire someone else to face their fears, no matter how impossible things seemed. As for the rest of Red Rock, life went on, but with a renewed sense of pride. The townspeople painted murals depicting the poker game, erected a small monument in the center of town, and even held an annual festival called Hold'em Heroes Day. Visitors from neighboring cities flocked to Red Rock to hear the story, firsthand buy souvenirs and take pictures with Jake, Emily, and Walter. The town's economy boomed, and for the first time in years, people began talking about expanding businesses, building new homes, and welcoming newcomers. But beyond the celebrations and memorials, something deeper had shifted. The encounter with the Valons had reminded everyone of humanity's resilience. It wasn't just about winning a card game. It was about proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, people could come together, think creatively, and find a way to prevail. That lesson lingered in the hearts of everyone who had lived through those tense days, shaping the way they approached challenges both big and small. Jake noticed this change most clearly during one of his regular poker nights at the Rusty Spur. A group of teenagers had gathered around a nearby table, laughing and shuffling cards. One of them, a shy boy named Sam, caught Jake's eye and hesitated before speaking. "Is it true what they say?" Sam asked. "That you saved the world because you stayed calm and played smart?" Jake smiled faintly, setting down his coffee mug. "It's true," he said simply. "But I didn't do it alone. We all worked together, me, Emily, Walter, and we never gave up, no matter how bad things looked." Sam nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at his friends. "Maybe we should try playing poker sometime," he said. "You know, to practice being brave." Jake chuckled softly. "That's not a bad idea," he replied. "Just remember, it's not about the cards. It's about how you play them." The boy grinned and turned back to his friends, already talking excitedly about organizing a game. Watching them, Jake felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the story of the poker match wouldn't just be remembered as a tale of survival. It might inspire others to believe in themselves, to trust their instincts, and to stand up for what mattered. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, bathed in the golden light of another Arizona sunset. Somewhere far above, the Valons continued their journey among the stars, carrying with them the knowledge that humanity was more than just a collection of fragile beings on a tiny blue planet. They had seen proof of courage, creativity, and determination, and they would remember. Back at the rusty spur, Jake dealt another hand, the sound of laughter and conversation filling the air. Life in Red Rock wasn't perfect, but it was good. And for now, that was enough.